Today's session, as I mentioned before, is brought to you by Signify in collaboration with our partners in Signify. As Signify are an ethical data science and communications company who use open source data and proprietary machine learning technology to provide clients with brilliant audience insights. Working across politics, media, corp comms, charity, security, and agency, they are able to illuminate what people really care about. Before I pass on the floor to our IGNITEX advisor, Andrea, who is your host today, I would like to inform you that Andrea is also our IGNITEX advisor. She is also a Winter Olympian, and she is currently the president of the Slovenian Women's Football Association. And she is also a role model for many of us women in this industry. So Andrea, I'm going to pass the floor over to you and wishing you and the panel of speakers a very nice conversation today. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Neo. I'm really excited to be here today. First of all, good morning, good afternoon to all of you around the world, to some of you, good evening. It is my pleasure to assist in this session on safeguarding in sport today. Let me begin with some facts. A recent study funded by the EU called Cases, led by Mark Hartel, addressed interpersonal violence against children in organized sports in 6 European countries. The findings are alarming, with too many children experiencing at least one type of interpersonal violence before the age of 18. Let me give you some numbers. Psychological violence, 65%, physical violence, 44%, neglect, 77%, non-contact sexual violence, 35%, contact sexual violence, 20%. And contrary to the popular opinion, the study shows that boys are disproportionately more affected than girls, and that this phenomenon is prevalent in all countries. However, it's not only children, as interpersonal violence, harassment, and abuse in many forms and shapes harms athletes and other sport participants at any age. As a society and as stakeholders and operators of sport events, we all share responsibility for making sport healthy and safe for all participants. Emphasizing the safety of sports environment underscores the paramount importance of safety measures and even cutting-edge technologies to protect athletes, spectators, and stakeholders, and thus the need for creating a secure environment for sport events. Today's session on safeguarding in sport will be presented with a 360 degrees perspective, bringing the point of view of an overarching need for common definition, the story of a survivor, an advocate, and finally the perspective of a commercial opportunity. With this, I'm honored to introduce the first member of today's panel of speakers, Professor Dr. Nicolette Schipper-van Veldhoven. Dr. Nicolette is a researcher and lecturer in sport pedagogy, in particular towards a safe sports climate at Windesheim University of Applied Sciences. She has been a research program manager at the Dutch Olympic Committee since 2008, and she is a professor of sports risk and safety at the University of Twente. In addition, she's currently also a key member of the project BEST that Neo just mentioned earlier, Building European Safe Sports Together, funded by the EU, a project in partnership with IGNITEX and other partners. And this is a 2-year project that aims to increase the maturity of European sports in safeguarding. So let me start, Dr. Nicolette, with the first question to you. You have worked in the field of safe sport for more than 10 years. You said it is an aspect of sport that is very hard to improve, and change takes a long time. Why is it so? And also, can you share with us the definition of safe sport, harassment, and abuse, the complexity of setting such a definition, and what does it include? The mic is yours, Dr. Nicolette.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and it's always nice working with you also in the BEST Project, and also with IGNITX, and thanks for inviting me here. Well, I'm a professor at a university, so my view is from scientific point. And towards your first question, I think we need a culture change. That's why it takes so long that if you want to change a culture, it takes 10 to 20 years. And why do we need a culture change? It's because how we guide our athletes, how we think we can win medals, and we do that still in the hard way, or in the pushy way, or in the instrumental way we treat athletes. And I think we need a new set of knowledge, or the set of knowledge is already there, but we should use it, that we understand that we are there to guide young people towards the podium, and that coaches should serve the athletes and not the athletes the coaches. And the same counts for the system. But to the system I will come in my presentation. So because it's a culture change, and I knew that in the Netherlands, we work a long time on the topic of sexual abuse, but also on the content of emotional abuse, and almost over 30 years. And still we do the same things as the other countries. We have a lot in place, but also when you have things in place, you still want that the clubs, the federations are using all the toolkits we provide them. So it's also about how can you serve the people that they want to use the tools we develop. So, and this is my area. My area is sport risks and safety. On the one hand, so I'm looking into the negative sides of sport. We also do research into the prevalence of transgressive behavior, but we are also looking at the positive side of sport, because we always think that sport in itself is positive, but in itself, sport is neutral. So we have to also do something else within sport to get the positive effects of sports in it, so that it will help develop the children. So that's also an important area. And we noticed in the Netherlands that if we only want to address the safety area, nobody wants to change. But if you say to them that they also should change the positive side to get the positive side, then they say, oh, okay, but it helps medals. Yes, it helps medals. So we have to work differently, have different views on how to deal with this, that really winning thing, or the medal thing that's in the front of everyone, that's especially in elite sports. Next slide, please. I had trouble with my computer, so that's why somebody else is doing the slides. So I'm still there, but you all know these examples that reach the media. It's all kinds of behaviors within sports that's not safe, that people doesn't do feel safe in, and it's on a large scale. You mentioned the data from the Harthill. We also did the data in the Netherlands, and we have the same results. It's not only some examples within the media, but they are big numbers. So if you look at the red and the orange one, those are the more severe, more time framed, and you see that 1/3 is emotional abuse, 1/5 is physical abuse, and 1/6 is sexual abuse. So they are big numbers. So we really have to do something about safeguarding in sports. So what's safeguarding? So safeguarding in sport means protecting children and young people from all forms of abuse, preventing harm, and promoting their well-being. There are some different definitions, and also the International Olympic Committee made a good movie video about what's safe sport, so you can look at this link. And we also have a big organization called Safe Sport International, and they say everywhere, everyone is safe in sports. And if you look at what's safeguarding, I always think it's about ethical behavior. Ethics are guiding human behaviors, and these behaviors are formed by their own moral values or principles, but also by the social norms and values. And that's where also you say that elite sport is about performance, that elite sports should also contribute to physical, mental, and social aspects of health. We always say that you can reach medals if you don't treat athletes well. Of course, with a negative coaching, you can get medals. But we know that also with positive coaching and treating them well, we get the medals. So why should we treat our athletes so terrible? It's not necessary to reach the performance levels. So I'm really that we should take care of our athletes. And safeguarding is about ethical behavior in sports. And if we look at the responsibility, we only think it's the coach. Of course, the coach is a very important factor in treating the athletes and setting the scene. But it's also very important that the club has the good rules or the regulations of the culture in place. And also the policymakers, they need to know what they have to do to set the right rules and regulations and ask for the right behavior. And we know we all have a code of conduct, but do we behave like our code of conduct? So we can ask them all those questions, and you cannot only change the system. We want to change the system, but you have to do that on all levels. So that's also where BEST comes in. And we are now working at looking at how do we build this European safe sport together. So how do we build our system or the new system? And our task within BEST was also to create a conceptual framework of transgressive behavior. Marlene Hendrikman is my PhD student. She did a lot of work in this, so she gets the credits. And we were looking at the problem, and we did already a lot of literature research because that's our job. And we were looking at what are we missing? What's not there that we should address within the system? And if you look at safeguarding, we like to tend to the definitions that it's focused on categories of behaviors or identifying forms of harassment. But our main question in this was, in our search, was what causes this problem in sports? So how can we deal with these problems? We know that there are theories from the sociological part, like grooming, that a coach grooms an athlete and then it can occur. But if we look at the system, what is happening there that we all say it's okay, or we look away, or so that was our main point. And then we came to other scientific solutions, and then we looked into the more philosophical literature, and we came out to Foucault. And then you see it's the distribution of power. Power is intangible, so you don't know if it's there or if it's not there. So the social norms are creating the ones who having the power, and if you want to use the power. So power is shaped by relationships, and it can have different roles and different outcomes depending on this interaction. And if we look at the sports system, we see a lot of distribution of power in all ranges, from macro to meso to micro level. And then you see that it's about the pool of knowledge, what is the common knowledge we all have. So what are our norms within sport? Is it normal that we treat athletes like you have to listen to the coach always? So can the coach be so dominant as he is? Is that allowed? Because the social rule says, or the truth says, yes, that's okay, because that's our system. But if you look to that same truth to the eyes of children, it's not okay. It's not helping them develop in the right way. So we have to look at those truths, the existing knowledge or the existing beliefs within the sport that helps create the not safe environment. And also the perceived, one back please, the perceived power, you can change also the ones that have power. And I have a nice example, because we have the Norwegian handball team. Handball is of course regulated by regulations, and they have also dress codes for competitions. And in 2021, the Norwegian team says, we don't want to wear the bikini bottoms. We want to wear normal trousers, and we don't do it anymore. So within the system, they get a fine because they were not handling with the regulations. But then they made a point because they said, why are those regulations there for women, but they are not there for men? So we won't want this anymore. And they started the discussion. So they targeted the perceived power, and they had to change. So in 2022, because of starting this discussion and starting this idea that it's not okay, the handball the international handball federations changed the rules for clothes. So you see, you can, if you want to, and you know it's not okay, within the pool of knowledge, change the perceived power and get power yourself. So it's about how power is exhibited, in what context, over who, and with what effects. So that's why we came within the BESST project to a new definition of how to look at the problem of safeguarding. So allowing all forms that can be acknowledged without differentiation in particular characteristics. So all forms of violence, intention can be included in this definition. You focus on crossing boundaries, so all boundaries set by the ones who are receiving them, and also awareness of the relationships of power. So that's why we came up with that transgressive behaviors in sports are any form of misuse of a relationship of power, violating someone's access to safe sports. And it differs in the other definitions that we include the interpersonal relationships. It means something. So if you say within this community, in the interpersonal relation between an athlete and a coach can be discussed. In which way you see, is the power projected in a good way or in a bad way? But it also counts for the macro level. If you look at the kiss from the Spanish manager, you see that that was also distribution of power, but also that they think it was the truth that they can handle in that way. If you want to change that, you have to address that the truth of his actions is not acceptable anymore. So also on that level, you can target the ideas of how people think they have to act or act themselves. So how to turn this around? It's a context-centered approach. It's depending on where you are, because the interpersonal relationship makes how you look. It's always athlete-centered in the best interest of the athlete. So you create a holistic view. You have shared responsibility. It is an integrated approach, and safeguarding should be in one's DNA. And that's how we then change our culture. It's how do we believe, how do we look at the system, and what do we think it's right to do within all layers of the system. So in the end, it's a question of attitude, integrity, ethical behavior, and also starting the ethical discussion of how we want to treat our athletes. How do we want to reach our medals? Is it okay to narrow down all the athletes because of the medals? And can we treat them as instruments and not as persons in sake of the glory of a nation? So we should target all those ideas and say it should be different. We have to deal with this safeguarding project. It should be on top of all agendas because it's about persons, it's about athletes, and we have to take care of them. And then we will also get the medal. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolette. You're as informing and as inspiring at the same time that it's really always a pleasure listening to you. Let me ask you one question. So one way or key mechanism to tackle harassment and abuse is education. So what is your advice for sport organizations and sport operators in this sense?
I think, well, it's always a bit hard to say what to do because within the Netherlands, we work with a lot of volunteers. And of course, we have professionals. From professionals, you can ask, of course, that they have a mandatory a module of learning about safeguarding, when it appears, how it appears, what are the signs, so that they really know what is it. So education is a good part. I think also that within for volunteers, we should make it mandatory, because they need to know that it's there in sport, and that you have to deal with it. So also it should be mandatory that they know that safeguarding is a part of sport that we should take care of. But it's not only about education. I think that sports organizations and sport clubs should start the ethical discussion. Who do we want to be? What are our norms and values? What's the culture we want to operate in? So how do we deal with our power? So do we see the power in the right ways? Do we do the right things for a person? So it's really also about self-reflection on all levels. So the coach, you need self-reflection from the coach. Do I do the right things? Have I had the right attitude towards athletes, but also within the club? Do we have a climate that says kids first? And also all the policymakers, do they have attention for not only the technical part of sport, but also for the caring part of the athletes within sports? So I think education is very good. You should have a mandatory for the safeguarding part, but you also should start the ethical discussion.
This is fantastic. Yes, discussion, talking about it, and deciding from all stakeholders how they want the sports to be, and do a self-reflection. I think that's really, really strong points there. I would like to just tell everyone of the participants today that we will move on with the other two panelists, and then at the end you will also have the opportunity to ask questions from the floor to Dr. Nicolette and to others as well. So let me introduce our second panelist, Joanna Maranhão. Joanna is a four-time Brazilian Olympian and a survivor of child abuse. Because of her activism, a new law has passed in Brazil, preventing cases of child abuse from happening. She's currently a researcher on the topic of safeguarding. She's a chair of the Brazilian Olympic Committee Ethics Committee and a member of the IOC Safe Sport Working Group. Joanna, safeguarding has been put as one of the biggest threats in modern sport, but it has always been there, hiding behind an unprepared sport system. With you being part of different groups studying and designing the solutions of the current challenges, what are the most significant changes you have seen in the development of safeguarding in the recent years, and what can we expect in the years to come? What is your view on all this? The microphone's yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea, for the presentation. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So for the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to see if we can cover those questions. So I come from this place of personal experience. Although I achieved my childhood dreams, like started swimming at 3 years old, and I retired, which is like, it's still hard for me to say like retired because I still feel young at 31. Like I representing my countries in 4 editions of the Pan American Games, 4 editions of the Olympic Games, like racing in the Olympic finalists. This was all like everything I've ever wanted. However, I've also experienced the dark side of sports. And the reason that I started my advocacy journey was because when I was finally ready to verbalize and then tell about my story, justice was simply not there for me. So as Andrea have said, I did start my advocacy journey trying to lift the statutes of limitations in my country, and the law carries my name, which is something that I'm extremely honored. However, we all know that it's not about what's written in law, but rather how they are enforced. So now we have the legislation, so we need to keep working to ensure that when people go into those systems, that they're treated with dignity. Following up that, I just realized that while swimming, it didn't just make sense to just trying to hit, fast paces and swim the best 400 IM. So I was always trying to balance my advocacy versus my swimming career. So I worked into awareness campaign. You know, I'm a small part of the mandatory course that was made the Brazilian National Olympic Committee. I moved to Belgium with my family to do my master's in sports ethics and integrity. And my research was, until today, the only quantitative research on the extent of interpersonal violence among elite athletes in Brazil. And the results were way higher than any other studies that had been done, including the one that Andrea mentioned that was recently published. I was luckily to be guided by Dr. Tina Vertomen, and she was extremely kind, like guiding me and coaching me in this academic career in a trauma-informed way, knowing my background. So I was lucky to have a very positive academic experience with her. The IOC working group that I'm going to talk a little bit further, and everything that I share, it's already public. I'll just go more into details. And my main job today is I work for the Sport and Rights Alliance, and we're trying to build this network of athletes with lived experience so we can like create those safe spaces, provide emergency fund, and try to advance our rights, like creating this collectively in a democratic way. So just briefly mentioning the Sport and Rights Alliance, we are a coalition where we try to push human rights in and through sports. And we envision a world where global sport is an authentic force for good. So we don't deny the problems and the issues within sports, but it's because we do believe that sports can be a force for good that we do the work that we do. All right, so the first question that I'm going to try to answer today is what has changed over the years? Personally, I think that the most significant revolution that we have been seeing is like athletes no longer being in silence. Although there's still an inherent lack of trust, there's still fear of retaliation. We're seeing more and more groups, you know, being vocal and organizing themselves to demand, you know, that they are safely and effectively engaged in the decision-making process. So I think that's very significant. And I say athletes, however, we need to know that everyone within the sporting ecosystem can suffer harm. However, if you do like a pyramid, we know that athletes are at the bottom. They are the most vulnerable and the ones that are mostly harmed. I think that there's also no more space for us to deny that this is an integrity issue. And in my humble opinion, is the biggest threat to the integrity of sports. Back in 1999, I think people would be, no, it's anti-doping because of the scandals and so on. I think we can say that anti-doping, match fixing, and poor governance, they have more resources than safeguarding. But if we think of like the human interactions and so on, they're actually under the umbrella of safeguarding. So for many, many years, we have treated those cases as in like, oh, this is a single episode. But as Dr. Nicolette have shared, and I also just put it there, I didn't want to go through that, but the results from my research and others, we know that this is a systemic issue. So whether we approach it from a research perspective or from an advocacy perspective or from media coverage, we can no longer deny. So we cannot go backwards. What else? Let me see. So we've also been seeing an increasing body of knowledge, which is very important that we like do evidence-based actions. Like from a practical side, we've been seeing policies being implemented and reporting systems, hearing systems, and so on. But this is very important that this is evidence-based. So having more and more prevalence studies from all regions of the world. Now we have significant research from the global north, not so many from the global south. Just Australia that had published, and the one that I've done in Brazil. So we need more like in Asia, we need more data from South America in general and Central America, from Africa and so on. There is some literature from a governance perspective on the quality of the policies that are being implemented. There is some literature into the reasons why athletes don't go into the reporting system, which is very important. Like, why is it that they do not trust? And there's also some research on the experiences of those who decided to go through those reporting systems. So that's extremely important. we've been seeing more and more countries and sports like establishing safe sport entities, which is interesting, but they're like a small piece to the puzzle. We need to ensure that those entities are everything, right? That they are done with legitimacy and the trust and the safe and effective engagement of people with lived experience. So on what's coming, now I'm going to just go a little bit into detail as I was sitting at the IOC working group. So I think it was back in March that the IOC has announced 10 million to strengthen safeguarding measures at the local level. And they established like a working group with some people with lived experience, some international federations, some NOCs. And together we're kind of to like, let's try to create this framework to ensure that we try to tackle remedy because it is at the local level. So the framework will be in the form of regional hubs. Sorry. And those hubs, they will try to provide remedy in general. And when I say remedy here, I'm talking about remedy as both an outcome, but also in the process. Because if you ask to any people with lived experience, what is remedy to you? You're going to hear loads of different answers. So those hubs, they will provide psychological support, legal support, like remedy in general, and that's going to be tailored to the context of that region. They envision to have like a pool of independent investigators, which is very interesting because for us who do like advocacy in those spaces, we kind of know that usually athletes and they're afraid of like the conflict of interest within those existing system. And they envision something that I think it's very important. It's like to create like an international standards on like do's and don'ts. And this will be done through like similar to the consensus process with stakeholder engagement, which is very interesting. So I personally think there is a lot of potential within this model. But one thing that I want to point out is that the second area there's that strengthen safeguarding measures at the local level. So it doesn't mean like solve the safeguarding. So it's like a collaboration. However, what we are doing at the local level needs to be continued to be done. Like sports governing bodies from the local level, they should not stop to do whatever that they are doing or trying to save resources because there is a regional hub there. No, the regional hubs are supposed to collaborate. We have to keep doing what we are doing. And we all know that at the moment it's not fit for purpose. So we need to do even more. And what I meant through a margins in approach is that the first hub will be in Africa, which is very interesting. The second one will be in Oceania. And the third one most likely will be in Europe. So that's a margins in approach, which is something that it's very important that we try to look into those who are the most vulnerable with the least resources and so on. And now I'm going to say a lot of eyes here because that's my humble piece of advice and response to your question, Andrea. I'm aware that this is a very complex issue, but the complexity of the issue shouldn't stop us from trying to find small pieces to the solution, mitigate harm. Every single thing that we do matters. However, in order for that to be strong and in like have a foundation so we can increase the trust that at the moment is lacking, we need to safely engage people with lived experience. And I don't say this because, oh, we know it all. We don't. If I tell you that I know it all, I'm lying. I'm an expert in my own story, not in every single story. But the multiple voices from people who are harmed by the system, where control was taken from them, we are part of the solution and we have the right to be a part of the solution. Not in a tokenistic way. So it's not about like inviting us to speak and repeat our stories over and over again. It's not just that, because that has an effect, but that's not all. But we're talking about everything, to policy development, to being arbitrators, to be safeguarding officers, to being researchers, everything, to evaluate. I've mentioned that the IOC is considering to do like a top-bottom framework. However, we know that culture plays a role here, right? So I think it's very important, like apart from having a framework from the IOC that is like top-bottom towards the sports governing bodies and the people within the Olympic movement, I think it's very important to have something at the national level, or sport specific. The more, the better. So those documents are in harmony, and when it comes to national frameworks, that they are in accordance with national legislation. Sports are usually funded by the government. My country, like more than 90% of the funding that goes to the Brazilian National Olympic Committee comes from the government. So instead of just conditioning that to like a thick box, like have a policy in place, have a reporting system, educate people, I would like to see something as in like athletes. We are continued evaluated, right? Like we evaluate our performances, people from the outside evaluate our performances, and the media does the same. You do well, you didn't do well, you lived up to the expectations, you failed, and so on. So I feel like here, the way forward would be the same thing. Like when you establish a policy, you enforce a policy, how well are you communicating your policy to the people, to the stakeholders within the environment that you operate? Because even though policies are something that they are at the interest of the institution and the people, it's unlikely that athletes are going to stop whatever they're doing to read a policy. So how are you communicating this in the, and there are ways to do it. I'm not a communications like expert, but there are ways to do it. So make sure that the stakeholders understand what is it that you are enforcing. When it comes to education in the long term, instead of just saying 500 people took my course, 1,000 coaches, I have like 35 coaches in safeguarding. Are you evaluating if the interventions that you're doing are actually changing behaviors? Are actually making people think, oh, this is naturalized, but it's not acceptable? Are athletes like reflecting about the peer-to-peer violence? Like evaluate that in the same way that athletes are evaluated in their performances. And the same thing goes to reporting systems. Like if you establish something and you get no reports, that's a red flag. So that's rather because people don't trust what you have established, rather than you don't have cases going on. Like just enter this world knowing that harm is happening, even though I'm hearing stories or not. So do people trust your report system? If they don't, why? For those who are going into the investigation, like ask them for feedback and don't take it personal, kind of like, how uncomfortable was the process? What is it that I can do to improve it? Be transparent so you can get consent. I think this is very important. And now to wrap up, when we talk about safeguarding, we talk about prevention, response, and remedy. So for prevention, I've mentioned like evaluate that. And I feel like when it comes to prevention, we have a substantial amount of content there. When it comes to response, I really don't see any gold standard framework of investigation in place at the moment. I see some good elements. And when it comes to remedy, that's almost scarce. Like there's almost no access to remedy for athletes and people who have suffered harm through sports. So I would like to see more of that. And the last thing is that low-level concerns are not insignificant concerns. I know that from a disciplinary and from a criminal procedure, it's very hard to sanction based on what we tend to consider low level. And I say low level because only the person who was harmed is the one who can tell how severe it was. But from a criminal procedures, I do understand that what I've been through is classified as severe, whereas something that is like psychological harm is seen as less severe. However, all the way up to attempted rape and rape, it doesn't start there. It starts from a low level. So be mindful that low-level concerns are not insignificant concerns and try to mitigate that. So you try to avoiding the most severe concerns. So hopefully I didn't go over the 15 minutes.
You are perfect, as you said, as in sports. Everything.
Yeah, because I was timing myself. Because thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for for your vision and for your insights. Let me ask you one question before we move on. So you are a survivor, you're an Olympian, you're a researcher, you're an activist, and you're a leader. With all this background and activities, what advice can you give to the people operating sports on all levels today?
I think my biggest piece of advice, both from my experience and what I hear from colleagues by experience, will be to shift from an institutional priority towards a victim's priority. It can be the same thing, but it's most likely not the same. One example of this is there's a scandal, and the first institutional response is we're going to enforce a policy. Policies might not mean much to those who are affected. So I'm a big believer of, if you want to start something, instead of starting from a policy, start an assessment with the most vulnerable. What is it that they think it's the most important thing? I think that's a good way forward on a first engagement of people with lived experience.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this insight, for your advice. And we will come back to you with opening the floor for more questions from the participants just after we go to our third panel speaker, Jonathan Hirschler. Welcome, Jonathan. Jonathan is a co-founder and CEO at Signify, and as Nia already introduced, but I will maybe remind us again that Signify is an ethical data science and communications company who use open source data and proprietary machine learning technology to provide clients, as we say, brilliant audience insights. Working across politics, media, corporate communications, charity, security, they're able to illuminate what people really care about. So, Jonathan, let me ask you a question. The digital world has connected people, fans to heroes, perpetrators to victims. People are hiding behind their devices and fake profiles to digitally harass and abuse victims. And sports is unfortunately also included in this scenario. How can technology act as the solution for this challenge? And what changes sport organizations should make to protect their stakeholders? The mic is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. It's great to be involved in this initiative and in this event, and also tough to follow the speakers who have just been talking. Some really incredible presentations and experiences being spoken about there. So I'll try and add something to those. As you say, Andrea, the company I work for is a data science company. We've done a lot of work in sport recently. We set up to do exactly what you just described, which was to help clients understand their audiences better using social media data. But what we've ended up doing is sort of pivoting a little bit, and we've set up this service called Threat Matrix, which is a focused solution on detecting online abuse. Where is it coming from? How is it being sent? How is it being targeted? What are the tactics being used? And to answer the question that you've just asked around, what kind of solutions are out there for dealing with these kinds of problems, we've built one, and that is exactly what it is. There are lots of different solutions out there. There are lots of different ways of tackling the issue of online abuse, which in itself is under the umbrella of safeguarding in so many ways. And we have set up this system, which I'm going to put on screen and take you through some of the examples. I hope everyone can see that. The service itself has been set up to do the things that I've just mentioned. So proactively capture abuse across platforms, different types of abuse, detect fixated threat and prolific abuse as well, identify where it's coming from, provide, where we're working with clubs and sports organizations, provide evidence to empower action, and of course work with the social platforms to tell them to take things down, but not just the post or the comment, but deal with the account, deal with the source. And we work within existing processes, reporting processes. We work across languages. We help on DMs as well as what's publicly out there. We look at emojis and images as well as text, and we support intervention and education programs. And I'm kind of interested in what Joanna was just talking about in terms of, you really need to understand what the problem looks like before you can put solutions out there, before you can start writing policy papers, before you can start helping regulators to improve the situation. And that's what we've been doing. We've been doing this for a number of years now. We've been working across a whole range of different sports at different levels. from domestic clubs and national teams in football to world athletics, major global events. We've done World Cups in football. We've done Olympic Games in athletics. We work across international tours in tennis. Done a lot of work with player unions as well, in particular in sort of real world sports, in esports, which has been really useful, especially getting into the policy debate and helping regulators to improve not just processes, but also the law and what the law is able to do. And there have obviously been a number of changes, even this morning in Europe, but there have been a number of changes across regulatory bodies in the US, in Europe, in the UK, where we're based as well. And then more recently, and actually, if you keep your eye on the news over the next few days, you'll see some of our reports coming out. We've done a lot of work we covered the Women's World Cup with FIFA, which was a fascinating event to cover. We've also been doing work with World Rugby, where we've particularly looked at match officials as well as players receiving death threats, really horrible abuse. And what we've proven through our work, through working with these organizations, is that you can do something about it. You don't just have to let it come at you. There are solutions to this problem. And it's not just about waiting for the platforms to deal with the issue. You can do much more about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just partly to answer the question that you've asked, Andrea, but also to show what this looks like on the ground. I'm going to show a few examples, a few case studies of some of the work that we've done, and just try and prove to you that technology, as well as being part of the problem here, it is also part of the solution and can be used as part of the solution. So I'm going to look at some of the major tournaments we've worked at. I'll look at the Men's World Cup, the work we did there with FIFA. I'm going to talk about the difference between individual athletes.
Bobby, sorry for what?
Sorry. I'm going to talk about individual athletes receiving abuse, but also the difference between that and team sports. Issue-based abuse, what we can see, what kind of issues we can understand, the gender imbalance in terms of what we see being targeted at female athletes versus male athletes, and then real-world actions and what's possible. And I'm going to do all of that in about 10 minutes, so I'll do it pretty quickly. And then we'll talk about where things are going next. So at the FIFA World Cup in Qatar, these were some of the headlines that came out following the work that we did. There was a lot of huge amount of abuse being targeted at athletes, at players across the tournament. And the action that we took was to cover over 20 million posts that mentioned the players at the tournament. We identified nearly 20,000 messages that were verified as abusive. We passed those through to the platforms to have them taken down. We looked at the accounts behind them. We identified a huge number of those. And of the ones that passed some kind of law enforcement option, so, criminal abuse being sent over social media, we picked out over 1,000 accounts. You can see this traffic light system on the right-hand side. We identified over 300 of those and have been working with law enforcement and also with different jurisdictions to take action, to have these people taken down offline, to have further action take place behind the scenes. And then again, understanding what the picture looks like, to see what that looks like. You can see the kind of insights we're able to provide across an entire tournament. You can see where the spikes of abuse are, what they're being triggered by. And it wasn't just playing, it wasn't just matches taking place. It was the second biggest spike of abuse we saw was actually Kylian Mbappe sending a supportive message to a teammate who was playing that day, and Mbappe wasn't. That triggered a huge level of abuse. And other learnings were that a lot of abuse that came from Spanish-speaking countries, particularly South American countries, when one of their teams exited competition, big spikes of abuse were identified, and the platforms seem to have a gap in what they're picking up. So our information being passed to the platform helped to improve that situation. And you can see from the map that we've created where all this was coming from. At the Men's World Cup, there was a huge amount coming from South American countries in particular, as well as European countries. Fast forward to the Women's World Cup, actually, because of the political situation in the US and the prominence of the US women's team, a huge amount of abuse came from that country in particular. So these kinds of insights are really interesting, both in terms of informing platforms, in terms of informing federations, and different member associations in terms of what they can do. Then you get into the difference between team sports, which we were just looking at, and individuals. And again, talking to people who are setting up security and safeguarding initiatives for particular events. This is a good example. Working with World Athletics, and we covered the last Olympics in Tokyo. We identified one athlete in particular who received a huge amount of abuse. She was number one on our list. She was an American athlete, and she was number one on our list of most abuse received or detected during the event, mainly because one account had sent her hundreds and hundreds of messages. So we identify that was happening. We identify the account. We get in contact with the US athletics team. They put us onto the FBI. And then we pass evidence of what we've identified. Action was taken, real concerns, real threat was there, in that we associated the account to the same state that the athlete trained in. So there was a real problem and a real risk there. We passed that information through and action took place. And then fast forward 1 year, the same athlete broke a number of records at the Oregon World Championships in her home country. And she moved from number one on our list to number 17 on our list in terms of most abuse received. And that, for us, that was what we were there to do. But it does also show that if you can pick up this kind of information and do something about it, it's possible to really put safeguarding in place in terms of online abuse specifically, and what you can do. And then the further point, just again to lean quite heavily on what Joanna was talking about in terms of understanding what the picture looks like. This was a study we did with 2-player unions, 3-player unions, in fact, because it was also FIFPro were involved in this, but in the US, in US basketball. And we did this during the sort of early 2021, where BLM was going on. You had George Floyd, big racial tensions were really taking over. And if you had asked us before we started the study, what was the biggest category of abuse that we identified targeting this 70% Black athlete league in the US, we all would have said it would be racist. And we'd have been completely wrong, because it was homophobia, and homophobic content was what we identified targeting the athletes. The platforms weren't picking up enough of it. We helped them understand what that picture looked like. Interestingly, when this information was shared with the player unions and the players themselves, they all said, yes, we know, we've been saying this for a long time, but nobody's listening to us. So, giving that information from really big data sets to prove what's going on the ground was really, really helpful and really useful. And then the last example I'll give is the difference between abuse that we're seeing in the sort of men's game versus the women's game in all different sports. But I'll use an example from, again, from football. We did some work with the anti-racism charity Kick It Out here in the UK. And this compared abusive messages that were received in terms of volume and type, as you can see in this image, across 2 months of the Premier League season at the beginning of this year. And this was interesting because it was the first time we saw a player from the WSL, from the Women's Super League, move up into the top 10 of most abused players from the Premier League, from the men's game. And this also shows that the growth of the women's game is really, it's taking hold. There's more visibility. There's one particular player here who we're talking about, Alicia Lehman, who has a very high following on Instagram. And apologies, I'm going to put some of the abuse that she's receiving on screen. So if you don't want to look away now. But these are the kind of messages that we're talking about. And, there's no question that these are misogynistic and sexually abusive, and there's no space for them. There's no way you can argue, the platforms can argue that these should be left to sit up on screen. So they need to be taken down as quickly as possible. And that's what we help to do. I'm going to skip over my last example and just skip to the end, because I can see that we're running quite short on time, and I know that some discussion that might want to take place in a second. But where is all this going? There are lots of innovations and solutions out there. We're one of them, but there are plenty of different things that can be done. The difference between what's being sent in public messages, which is what we focus on, and DMs as well, is a key area that we're focusing on. The crossover between match fixing, inappropriate online contact, approaches, and angry gamblers getting involved and targeting players and athletes because they've lost a bet or something like that is an area that we're seeing a huge amount of within the work that we do. The introduction, as I mentioned at the beginning, of regulations that are going on at the moment, the online safety bill here in the UK, the DMA in the European Union, and other countries as well, are making a difference. But you still need to pick up what's going on, and you still need a benchmark to understand whether these regulations are going to make a difference and understand whether things are getting better or worse. And then only then can you really hold the platforms to account and really tell the world that they're either getting better or they're getting worse. This filters into education, into initiatives around academia, but also into understanding of what the picture looks like. And then the last thing to mention is this sort of second wave of AI with generative AI. I think it's going to make the problem worse in terms of the ability to send more abuse faster at more volume, but it can also help to make it better because we use those kinds of tools to identify the abuse, to understand the tactics, and to improve the solution. So if I had to summarize where things are going, we need to benchmark and measure the problem to really deal with it. We have to understand the issues, as the previous speakers have been talking about in some detail. We need to identify the best solutions. There are plenty out there, and action needs to be taken off the back of that. So I will stop talking. I think I've been about 12 minutes, which isn't too bad for me. I normally talk way longer than the time I'm given. So I'm going to stop there and allow more questions and some discussion to go forward. But I hope that was useful.
Jonathan, that was extremely useful. I really enjoyed seeing the numbers. They're quite fascinating as they are alarming. But I'm very reassured that there's work being done in this area, which I think it's incredibly important and on the rise, obviously, in today's world. And it really impacts sport and athletes hugely. So in your opinion, whose responsibility it is to protect against harassment and abuse in digital environment?
So I've touched on that in the slides that I've presented today, and the first answer to that is the one that everybody says, which is, well, it's the platforms. It's that, they are where the content is being pushed. They're the ones that should deal with it. But we can't sit and wait here for the platforms to deal with the issue. We need to deal with it, and we've proven that we can deal with it in other ways, as well as holding them to account and as well as partnering with them. We work with them as well. And we have very good relationships with a lot of people who are doing very good things over at the different platforms. But to really answer the question, I will explain how we approach this and the conversations that we have. And that is, whenever we go to a federation or a league or a club or whoever, the buck gets passed around a lot. And there is no single person who has the responsibility to deal with it. And if we're talking to, let's say, a Premier League football club, it goes from the comms team to the social media team to the safeguarding team to the security team to the comms. It just goes around all over the place. And the issue is that it's quite a new phenomenon, and there is not enough responsibility, certainly at board level, for people to know who should be dealing with this. And only then, when someone's got responsibility, can they start to look at the real solutions and then go ahead and deal with it from that perspective. So I think it needs to be all of the people I've just mentioned, but there needs to be clear guidance and understanding who's responsible within an organization, and they can take that lead. And we work with, equality, diversity, inclusion teams as well as safeguarding and player welfare, athlete welfare teams. And I think they're the ones that have the sort of day-to-day focus on this issue. They're the ones that are making the noise about it and saying something needs to be done. Who do we need to work with? How do we need to deal with the problem? And then it needs to move up to sort of board level and federation level to deal with those issues. So yeah, my answer is it's a teamwork response. It has to be a teamwork response. But either regulation or within organizations, you need to have responsibility. You need to have a point of contact who can say, I will pick this up and I will deal with this issue. And it only moves forward when that happens.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Now it's the time that we open the floor for all the participants to ask any questions to any of the panelists. I will look at what Neo prepared for the questions. So we have one question from Daniela. She says, how refreshing and interesting to see the digital transgressive behavior being discussed. Many times, because there's no personal contact, they're not addressed. Question to Jonathan, how do you see these digital monitoring platforms multiplying and being made available to smaller sports and events organizations?
That's a really good question, and I have to start by saying there is a cost involved, and our service, talking about our service, and there are lots of different ones, but our service it costs, unfortunately, quite a lot of money to run it, because the level of data that we need to be able to run through in order to pick out where the abuse is and who it's being targeted at is quite heavy, and we pay. This is going to sound crazy. We pay the platforms for access to their data in order to help them keep their platforms clean. And I know that sounds a little bit stupid when I hear myself saying it, but it's the truth. So, it can be an expensive proposition to do. However, when you do it at scale, when you have organizations who are willing to sponsor this to cover an entire sport, for example, and we are working in that way across whole sports. With rugby, we're bringing a number of organizations together. Same with tennis, same with football, same with athletics. When you do that, the cost comes down, the scale in terms of what you can cover goes up, and the insights and the kind of action that can be taken can be multiplied massively. So again, it goes back to what I was saying at the end of my presentation. Teamwork makes the dream work. You have to have people working together in order to bring the cost down, in order to scale this kind of solution. But there are, as I say, I'm coming from a commercial background. We have a service, I run a company, but we work in partnerships with lots of different providers who come at this from different angles. Some of them are more cost effective. Some of them are, free. There are free tools to use. The platforms offer free tools as well, that you can utilize, but you need to know what you're looking for. You need to know the filter words that you need to put into an account in order to hide things, in order to pick things up, in order to report things. So it is all about working together across different sports and learnings from across different sports to make that work, to make it work effectively.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. We have another question from Michael, who really liked the presentations. And he says, myself, I have played a small role in the workings of the advocacy in Canada. My concern and question is the engagement of for-profit safe sport advocates that are constructing programs that engage survivors, which then use those stories to gain government-funded sport organizations contracts while sharing those perceived confident meetings for financial gain. How do we confront the realities of these organizations? So maybe, Joanna, do you want to address this one?
Yeah, sure. So as we've been seeing more and more engagement, still far from ideal from people with lived experience, we don't know the solution yet. So like I said, everyone is a small part of that solution. So this is the Canadian situation. So for me, from Brazil, living in Germany, I cannot tell what is the best way to solve the Canadian. But one thing that I believe it's very important is, like, when you talk about the engagement of people with lived experience, and I said this a couple of days ago on the panel, we're not the same. We're like, some of us think that they want to work within the system. So they want to work within the National Olympic Committees. They want to be the official safeguarding officers. They want to work at the IOC. That's their strategy, because that's how they see the way forward. Myself, I put myself in the middle, which is like someone who works from the outside. I work for a civil society. But I'm okay with collaborating with sports governing bodies at my own term, to collaborate for them to do the right thing, or what I believe it is the right thing. But there's also another group that is more vocal, and they want to work from 100% from outside the system as watchdogs and calling upon sports governing bodies. When I talk about the safe engagement of people with lived experience, I'm talking about the range of all those groups. I know that the conversation can be hard sometimes, but this is how we move forward. This can slow down the pace of the solution, but that's what I was talking about when I was referring to legitimacy. Survivors are not the same. People with lived experience are not the same. We all want to stop this from happening, but we have different strategies. So how is it that you're gonna try to harmonize and deal with the expectations so you don't overpromise and underdeliver?
Thanks, Joanna. We'll just go to the next question since we have a few more. The next one is from Norasila. I would actually address this question, if you can briefly both address it, Dr. Nicolette and Joanna. Malaysia has just set up a safe sport code. However, the majority of the country does not understand what is safe sport, what is safeguarding. So in your experience with advocacy in your country, what is the best way to get the safeguarding or safe sport message education out to the public in the country? In addition, some athletes in some cases have to retract their statement just so to save their privileges as an athlete. Is the NOC the main organization that should lead the fight? There's quite a few questions here, and I think we could talk about it for a very long time, but maybe briefly, Dr. Nicolette, if you can say a few words to that, and then also Joanna.
Yes, because that's always the thing. If you want to address it in public, you need to discuss what is safe sport. And you know, it's not easy to talk about it, especially in countries who think, well, it's normal behavior. But you need to start a discussion. And we saw that also in the Netherlands. We discussed this about 30 years, and still we're discussing it. And still people are asking, what is it? How do we deal with it? And then it's safe sport climate. And then they think, well, we have done some modules, we have some toolkits available. So we have made the tick boxes, but then we didn't change the behavior. So we're now addressing also within the Netherlands the opposite side from the discussion, that we need a positive message towards the sports that includes children, to get children into sports and that they stay in sports, because there is a bigger problem also by movement declining and dropout in sports. So, and parents normally think it's important that children stay in sport, that they learn something from sport, and that therefore they need a safe sport climate. So we changed in the Netherlands a bit of the policy, not only towards the safe sport climate, but directly include the message what's in it for the sports organization, because there will be no dropout. They will have pleasure in sports participation. And then you see that's easier to get a discussion. But it's you have to do this over and over and over again. It's like continuing your message all the time and for a long time, because I work in this field a long time, and then they said, you're still doing the same. But I know, but it's still needed to do the same thing over and over. So it's like being a pit bull and staying on the same message. So I can advise Malaysia, stay on the message and play it out and stay with it and say, this is safe sport, and they will get to know safe sport.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolette. What about Joanna?
Well, when I'm talking to people in Brazil, I kind of start from what is safeguarding in sports, and what is safe sport. And we all agree that safeguarding is a word that doesn't translate to Portuguese. It doesn't translate to Spanish. So I'm like, it doesn't really matter how we call it. So try, like, let's build together. We can even, like, concepts are extremely important, but more is like the issue. So I always start from there to make them understand. Another argument that I usually do is the one that I've made here. I try to make them understand that there are several integrity issues within sports, but what we're talking about is at the core of it, because we're talking about the critical role of sport and how we make sure not just that we promote sports to people, but that people have their dignities respected while playing sports, that they are not like instrumentalized. Like, I wasn't an elite athlete, so I understand that I was instrumentalized many, many times, but that was also my will. I wanted to train hard. I wanted to go to the Olympic Games. So although this is not the focus of the questions, but it's to make sure that we like I said, we're transparent to get consent. If the athlete is super talented and they don't want to go throughout the performance ladder, that is okay. We cannot force them. If they want to just compete at the national level, that's absolutely no problem. So we need to give those people who are the most vulnerable the autonomy to decide what is it that they want to do. And I think that's also at the core of this instrumental violence and low-level concerns that tend to build up to more severe forms of violence.
Thank you so much, Joanna. We have, I think we will take 2 more questions. I would like to address this one to Dr. Nicolette. It's from Maya from Slovenia. She says, I'm from Ethical Commission of the European Olympic Committees, and we're preparing guidelines for European NOCs. What would you suggest what we should not leave out? Dr. Nicolette.
Okay. I think that EUC should notice that it's not only about getting the knowledge in place or getting the learning modules in place, but that they also think how they can really address behavior. So how they really can start the ethical discussions, how they want to be. Dus in the involvement of the regulations or in the things to do, they also should include ethical discussions. Because otherwise we will not change behavior. And it's not about, Joanna also said, it's not about tick boxes, that we have trust persons in place or we have a code of conduct, because they are already there. All those instruments are there. But it should change from instrumental being there towards included in the behavior of the people that's working in the sports area. So how can we make this transition from the learning part that's already there, the tools that are already there, towards using the tools? So they should think about, the EUC should think about how they can also implement in those documents to help understand the others to really work with the tools. And that needs sometimes an other translation.
Thank you for this. One other question for you, and then one for Joanna, and then we will stop because we will be over time. So, question from Farah. For Dr. Nicolette, how can safe sport, safeguarding be differentiated related to religion? For example, we have women athletes who are Muslim, who are pressured to not do the sport because it goes against religious norms. Would you like to address that?
Yes, this is a very difficult question, a very delicate issue. Because if you look at norms and values, also religion has norms and values, and they are in place. So you cannot say for the one religion that it's okay to do this, and for the other religion to do it's not okay, because that's in their norms and values. The only thing that you can say that if Muslims are pressured not to do sports because it's against their religion norms, well, I come from the Western world, and then I don't think it goes into the to the norms of religion, because men can do it also. But I don't know how to deal with those discussions, because we coming from a free world, so there are different rules. So I think this is very hard if you are in a culture that's pressured by itself to make discussions into values and norms, especially when they are also related to religion. So it's hard to do. Maybe Joanna, you have experience with it?
Well, I think my point would be with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but of course, like to tailor, because it's Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but also respecting the culture norms and the autonomy of the person. So it'll be like a mix between what the declaration says, what is culturally appropriate for that space, and what is it that the person actually wants to do. If they want to have access to sport, they should, because that's within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's my humble opinion, but I'm definitely not in the position as someone that comes from Brazil to tell what people should and shouldn't do.
Very real
I think it's
and
a good
very
point.
sensitive questions. Go ahead.
It's a good point, human rights, because that's universal. And I think within the community, we should help the Muslims themselves to create the discussion, because we cannot do that for them. It should come from inside.
Very, very good point. One final question from Ilva, Latvian from Sweden, to Joanna. Regarding the hubs that the IOC plans to establish, will it be only for Olympic sports?
Yes, but let me just clarify that I was sitting at the IOC working group and the mandate is over. I don't work for the IOC, and like the informations that I've shared are the ones that are public. So yes, Olympic sports, and not just the sports in the Olympic agenda. There are tons of sports type that are not in the Olympic agenda, but are sports type. But one thing that is important to mention is that it's for everyone who practices sport, not just Olympians, because like if we want to safeguard children, they are working towards the dream of becoming an Olympian. They are vulnerable also at the local level, and they should have access to those hubs.
Thank you so much. I know, and we would love to and could go on for days, in fact, and hopefully we will have other opportunities, but I think we've done a really good 360 degrees today. So I would say that we are nearing the end of the last session of Ignite Summit 2023. So I would like to just say a few words about, in this conclusion, that this year's theme of the Ignite Summit was charting the course, innovation and adaptation in sport events, which aim to provide an insight into navigating an evolving landscape of the sports event industry. And we believe that we covered aspects of the sessions that are crucial for the industry's growth and resilience, and we hope that you agree. Safeguarding must become a key component included in the preparation and implementation of sport events on all levels. IGNITE, as a partner of the EU-funded project Building European Safe Sports Together, will provide key inputs also in the development of a framework for safeguarding at sport events as one of the project's deliverables. For more information, I would actually like to invite you to visit the Building European Safe Sport BEST project website at best-safesport.eu, or even better, to sign up on the website to get updates when we have deliverables published. So I would like to thank you all for your engaged participation, and warm thanks to all the panelists for your contribution today, but not only today, for in fact, for everything you do every day to make sport a better and safer place. In summary, all stakeholders directly and indirectly involved in sport are responsible for ensuring the sport is free from all forms of abuse and continues to serve our local and global communities as a safe and enriching environment for all. I invite all of us today to share the awareness and importance of safe sport farther and wider. It is our responsibility. So with this, I'd like to give the floor to Neo.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you to Joanna, Professor Nicolette, and Jonathan.